Hi, I'm Bobby Halton, and on today's Hangout, I'll be the only person you're going to be seeing live. But I do have two extraordinary guests with me today for a wide-ranging topic. We're going to talk about everything from nozzle forward and fire behavior to high-end technology, new ways of capturing electricity, some amazing things that they're doing with smart cities and technology, some amazing things we're doing with language and training, some amazing things that we're doing across an incredibly broad spectrum of topics and information, because today it's truly my privilege to have on two of the guys who I enjoy talking to the most on the entire planet. Two of the most brilliant men that are currently involved in the fire service in ways that are so far reaching and so incredibly impactful that it's really hard to put it into words what the scope and dimension of these two gentlemen and their interests and their activities, how it's impacting not just your life as a firefighter, but your life as a citizen, as a person, as a human. And I think that's really the most important part. The other important part about it is they're really two of the most decent guys I've ever met. And when I say that, I mean, we're talking about people who, these two guys in particular, who could literally be anywhere, literally be doing anything today and always that would make them incredibly much more money and give them incredibly much more reach. But both of them choose to really focus on making the world a better place through their individual efforts and their individual industries. And they're very diverse people. I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute and tell you a little about their history, their background, and what they're doing now. But one is a firefighter, just like us. And today we memorialize and remember the death of four of his coworkers who died in the Pang warehouse fire, because the person who caused that fire is going to be released from prison soon. So it's kind of breaking news, which I think is an interesting coincidence. So we can talk a little about justice and culture and some other issues there as well. The other person, and that's Aaron Fields, my good friend Aaron Fields, who's a multi-generational family firefighter. His dad's on the job in the same battalion he was on. His brother's on the job. Just an amazing history, great story, and he's going to share a little of that with you today. My other buddy that's on with us today is Paul Doherty, who I met through activities I was engaged in the Sacramento Valley and in the Silicon Valley with people like Subpack and all these out-of-the-box incredible thinkers. And Paul was kind enough to come and visit with us during a technology summit. And then he was kind enough to fly from his office in Hong Kong to do a presentation for an hour and 45 minutes at FDIC that literally blew away the entire audience. I mean, I literally sat spellbound for an hour and 45 minutes, and I could have listened to him all day long. The things he's involved in, where he's going. Write down this right now. Orbifire. Orbi Fire. After we get done today, Google that, take a look at the videos, look at that incredible technology, because that's where it's going. I mean, and this is the man who's driving a lot of, well, all of that. That's one of Paul's company's products. And Paul's much deeper than that. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring on board. I'll begin with Aaron and Aaron Fields, who all of you know from, and Paul will be jumping in and out, but Aaron Fields, who you know from many appearances at FDIC and his writings, the creator of Nozzle Forward, probably one of the most innovative and creative guys we've got out there with an incredible background. I want Aaron to share, some of the stuff in his history. You talk about still waters running deep. This man is as deep as it comes. Aaron, thanks for joining us. Paul, thanks for joining us. Aaron, why don't you go first and give us a little bit of the background of Aaron Fields and what you're working on today, and a little bit about Nozzle Forward.
Well, I before I ever got into the fire service, I journeyed in a trade, and then was able to, a few years later, when I knew that this is what I wanted to do, the fire service that is, and was frankly a pretty shitty test taker, went to college, just to go to college to get better at tests and to just read books, which has always been an interest of mine. So I was able to put myself through college, and I studied history, and I studied linguistics pretty heavily, and then got out of school, a couple years of kind of loafing around, and then joined the fire service and have been in ever since. I got in when I was 29. And
your pop was on the job, though, right?
Yeah, my dad, I mean, I recently, my father still is. He, unfortunately, about 4 or 5 years ago, got sick, and they can't work on the line anymore. But he's healthy and working off in our fire marshal's office, which is a uniform position, and my brother works in the department as well. So we're all in the same battalion. And about a year and a half ago, I moved one station to the west of where I was to actually occupy the same seat, though not roll. My dad was the driver, so I'm on the back. But for us, every seat has a particular number, and I have his number. So I'm riding in the same seat he was for years and years.
Outstanding, outstanding. A little bit about nozzle forward, so
Well,
folks understand that.
yeah, I mean it's interesting you brought up the Pang. I was living across the street from that firehouse, the one I'm working at today. Thought my dad had died in the place of one of the guys that died. Who, I didn't know these guys super well, but I knew him well enough. And I was across the street the night of that fire, and so another event prior to that, kind of me becoming aware of what the ultimate stakes were before I ever got involved. And then I went to a fire academy, worked for another fire department before Seattle, and got beat up pretty good in one of my first working structure fires. And frankly, just said, this is bullshit. I mean, I didn't have the answer for what was in front of me because I'd never been trained on what was in front of me. I'd been trained in kind of as a lot of the fire service trains, in a way that's not resemblant of what is actually occurring. And so I started traveling and taking classes from kind of everybody that was leading the charge in engine work at the country at the time. And I would come home and I'd take detailed notes, and I would start working on stuff and just kind of tinkered and twisted and altered and I guess codified what I was learning into kind of a systematic approach, and evaluated what they were doing based off my own experience, but also having these phenomenal mentors and being able to bounce what I was coming up with off them and then put it to use in fires. And I think the main thing that a lot of people miss with the program is I didn't start by looking at all the variables. I started by looking at the one thing that everybody I practiced with did the same. I started from the one point, regardless of their generation or their geography, that they all shared in common, and started working from that point out, and have just continued to codify and create algorithms for the very limited number of skills that you need, but the ability to transition between them based off stimuli, feedback from your environment. And that it grew from there, and I started developing these skill sets. And then about 10 years ago, 10 years ago in March, somebody asked me, a training officer said, "Hey, you just showed our rookies a couple of things. Would you come show everybody?" And I was like, yeah, I guess. And went out and showed a few things, and then went up to Whatcom County, which is north of Seattle, and taught the first class that was to become the nozzle forward at the request of some people that had been involved in that very first, me sharing a few skills. And it's just gone from there. I mean, I never intended to be doing any instruction. I intended to not burn up in a fire. That's pretty low on my to-do list. So and it's just grown from there. And we intentionally keep a fairly low public profile, with regards to social media and all that stuff, because we prefer it to be kind of this grassroots thing of one person spreading the word to another person. And it's kind of befuddling how it's taken off. But the main thing is I never intended to put myself into a quote unquote teaching position. So.
Well, in order to help you keep it low key, I've been tweeting out about 11 times a day that you will be back at FDIC again,
No.
35,000 people, and you will be keynoting at FDIC along with Paul Doherty and Paul Combs for 2019. We're going to have Aaron Fields, Paul Combs and Paul Doherty on the stage. It's going to be an amazing lineup. We're not just talking about guys with experience. We're talking about guys with evaluated experience. We're talking about people who are changing the way we look at the world and the way we respond to the world, which is truly the definition of evolution, right? I know Aaron likes to tell folks that he's not instructing, he's simply sharing what he's learned and what he's been taught, which is a beautiful way to say that it's a team of teams and it's a sharing of worldview. And we are live and interactive, and I'll tell you what, you can get to us through hashtag FE Talk on Twitter. That's hashtag FE Talk, Fire Engineering Talk. And Sonny O'Connor wants to know, Aaron, real quick, what is the one history book that Aaron thinks all firefighters should read? What do you think? What do you think about, if you had to recommend one book, Aaron?
One? Oh my God. One book. I don't know. You know, actually, there's a, so I can't remember the title of it. It is all about teams. So my area of history, people are going to totally laugh at this, and that's totally all right. But my area of history is actually Mongolian and Central Asian. And the Mongol Empire, when it grew, was one based on not on traditional empirical value of property acquisition, because they were pastoral nomadic. And I think there's some really important lessons about assimilation of groups and the sharing of a worldview that the Mongols employed. Now, they were pretty get after it with it. We don't have to go and conquer and raid our neighboring fire departments, but you know, I think that there's some good stuff in that. I don't know. I mean, I read so much. I don't think I can pick just one, but I think that there's some important books to read. I think Thoreau, Walden is really important because it teaches about perspective and learning the woods and not the actual path, which the fire service is really good at. Dogmatic path without evaluation of what else is in the woods. I think, I mean, though it's become very popular in recently, my dad and mom gave me Marcus Aurelius when I was 11, Meditations, and I think that's really a good place to, those are good places to start.
Absolutely. So, anything by a Stoic, whether it's Meditations, whether it's Letters from Seneca, whether anything to do with a Stoic is a great place to start. And I would add, Sonny, if you kind of go along with Walden and Thoreau, take a look at de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. That's a fascinating read. That's a really fascinating read. Old book about the beginnings of our nation, and kind of a fascinating look back at history. Okay, so now let's bring on Paul Doherty with a radically different story, but nonetheless intimately connected to the American Fire Service. Paul is probably one of the most influential people that you haven't yet met. And tonight we'll be on MSNBC, or what, you're doing an interview tonight. Who's it with, Paul?
Yeah, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'll be on CNBC at 9:30 p.m. East Coast time, which is 9:30 a.m. here in Hong Kong, talking about smart cities and its effect on many things, including safety and security, which is always our main point as we're developing land. And Aaron, I was fixated with what you were saying, and thank you for your service. I am not in the Brotherhood, but I feel like I am. My grandfather started up the fire service in a place called Carndonagh, which is in County Donegal in Ireland. Subsequently, three of my uncles went along the same path and became fire chiefs in Carndonagh, and eventually for the entire county of Donegal. So I have very vivid memories. I was lucky enough that my dad worked for the airlines, and I grew up seeing my 52 first cousins over in Ireland every summer. but I was able to be at the firehouse. It's just part of family life. So I was kind enough to, or Bobby was kind enough to invite me to Indianapolis for this past FDIC, and boy, were my eyes opened. What a thrilling experience. I'm an architect, I'm a builder, and now a real estate developer, but have a very strong background into technology. And I thought I've been to some pretty impressive conventions and conferences, but none that I have never seen like FDIC, only because of the soul that's a part of it. People are there not just to have the camaraderie, which is great, and the networking, which is what conferences are all about. But everything from the hands-on learning, the types of information that were soulful, because at the end of the day, everyone that's listening to this, you guys put your and women put your lives on the line every day, and I wish more people would recognize that. I think as you're a kid, firefighting and firefighters and first responders are heroes. We're seeing that more and more and more. Now, usually because of unfortunate events. But the FDIC really opened up my eyes to seeing how everyone's trying to help each other. And that spirit was just energizing, Bobby. So just continued success, with that. So you mentioned that I come from a different angle on this. When we were looking at taking swaths of land and trying to do something with it, I think that unfortunately there's a lot of people out there, especially in the real estate industry, that look at it for yield. It's all about the money. How many homes can we get on a piece of farm? How many buildings can we get in there so that we can lease it? How quickly and cheaply can we get infrastructure in place? Let's get the bare minimum. And that's always been a very frustrating thing because, at the end of the day, you don't want to live in mediocrity. You want to provide tools to people and environments that are safe and secure, first of all, but raise the quality of life of people. So I was involved very early in my career working with IBM. I was the guy that did the drawings for trade show booths. You have to start somewhere. But what I learned was about technology, because you have to learn how it works in order to design it to be shown at conferences and showcases. And that was something that was very influential, because I realized that the technology had to be part of the actual physical built environment itself. You don't build a building, you don't build out infrastructure and then add technology later. From early in my career, it was just as important as wood or steel or glass. And what we found early, as we started to design in 1994 what is now turned into the Digit Group, or TDG, is that was a very important element into differentiating ourselves in the marketplace, because it was about how to make technology transparent to the process so that you can create situations and environments that will help save lives. And we kept that very, very near and dear to our hearts. We were responsible for putting together a lot of software as tools, because we felt that architects and engineers, as they're designing, should have the right tools in place so that they can design things that are safe and secure. So, those were the things that we really focused in on. We were very fortunate and sold a lot of these technologies to IBM, to a company called Autodesk. And right now those tools are being used by architects and engineers worldwide to create our built environment. But, Bobby, I sort of ran into a real brick wall just about 10 years ago, where I took a look around after selling our last piece of software, and we weren't raising the bar as fast as I thought. We were still building buildings the way that we always had, and unfortunately, computers were starting to mask a lot of the mistakes that the younger generation was trying to build. So, they would get around things like not having a sprinkler system by, not even calling it out, but the model looked really good. Or for egress, for getting in and out of that building during an emergency, they were cheating. They thought that the computer, well, if it looked good, well, it must be right. And we have an entire generation now that building our built environment that's making it difficult for everyone on this phone call to do their jobs. And it's our own fault. The technology makes everything look like it's perfect, but when you try and build from it, it doesn't work. And then you're relying on people in the field because of economics just getting away with it. This is a problem also because the governments of the world try and assist with this by saying that you need a building permit just to put up a building. But there's two big things that happen there. Number one, the majority of people do not reach out to their local fire departments when they're starting to design a building just to get some ideas. Why aren't we talking with the people that are going to be managing and saving lives earlier on in the design process? Because you may be thinking you're doing the right thing, but the past 6 buildings you did things wrong 6 times. That's number one. Number two, we are very famous in the construction industry for meeting code. Everything that we deliver, especially today, which is no longer just paper blueprints, but digital information, is meeting the minimum amounts of criteria. But that's mediocrity. I mean, that's the lowest common denominator, yet the majority of the industry worldwide are designing to code instead of designing from code. It should be a baseline that we then achieve better things so that we do have a safer environment. Classic examples and actually unfortunate ones like, the World Trade Center in New York. It actually met code and it collapsed the way that it was supposed to. But what happened to the life safety issues? What happened to, the telecommunications and how all that broke down? And there's multitudes of books and history and all that behind that. But what I learned, which was very profound, I was born in New York City. I lost 12 friends, in that terrible day, was that we doubled down and said, we're no longer going to be going and doing things the old way. We're not just going to create tools. We're actually going to do things, meaning we're going to use our own tools. We're not going to sell it out to the general public in order to create a better built environment. So we became a real estate development company, and it's been a remarkable ride. Bobby, I think it goes to show you that if you have your head in the right place, and you can deliver on a massive scale to help lots of people pay attention. We've been very fortunate to have that attention because of the amounts of trade and money that we instill as an organization out to places like China and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Dubai and throughout the U.S. Quite frankly, now. We've gotten the attention of a lot of politicians and government leaders, which means we have a bully pulpit. We've worked very closely with the Obama administration. We're very close with the current administration in Washington about exporting American goods and services based on innovation. And this is where it comes down to firefighting. We have to be able to sell a piece of dirt to someone because we built cities from scratch. We use American innovations then as ingredients, almost like in a kitchen. And we bring together those different elements in order to create a recipe that's in context for that particular society, that particular culture, or that particular part of a city, right? Because everyone has different needs. One part of the city may be crime-ridden, so that's going to be something that's a priority. Others, it's about education or healthcare or traffic. So what we've done is that we've created a different type of approach that says we need to focus in on safety and security first. Because if we're building a brand new city from scratch and I'm trying to have people fall in love with that piece of dirt, the number one thing they're going to say is, well, why do I want to go to somewhere where I don't feel safe and secure? Number two, of course, they want good healthcare. They want good education for their kids and that type of thing. But we start with safety and security. So we were very fortunate to meet up. We followed Google out to a place called Kansas City, Missouri, just about 7 years ago. And I wanted to, because they were putting in this thing called Google Fiber, very, very high speed connectivity. And I was like, why Kansas City? Well, we went out there and we met with the mayor, who's the current mayor, Mayor James, who I had the pleasure of seeing 3 weeks ago for the first time in a couple of years. And he was having a problem, a very, very pragmatic problem with fiscal budgets. It was his first year in office. And there was fights between the teachers' unions and the firefighters. They both wanted raises, and there was no budget for it. So he said, I'm going to do something while I negotiate that. Why don't you talk to my fire department about what their needs are and see if some of your technology can't help leverage the Google Fiber and see if we can't make some lemonades out of lemons. And I was very fortunate to meet up with Deputy Chief James Garrett, who promptly started my education process into the American way of firefighting and saving lives. And Bobby, it was the most remarkable few months that I spent out there learning. And there were two big takeaways. Number one, I needed to focus in on saving firefighter lives first, because if you can save the firefighter lives, they're going to be able to save yours. That was a big wake-up call. The second one was the stunning revelation that the majority of incident commanders that are out in an event, they are still using pen and paper, grease pen on the side of trucks, that type of thing to account for people's lives. Who's going in, when and where, what's the time and date stamp. And it's being done in rain and snow at night, in heat. And that's the state of the art. So we went on a global tour of the other real estate projects that we were working on. Do you know that everyone has a very similar type of story? And their major fear is not so much the people going in, but when did they come back out? Because a lot of loss of life and injury occurs in the event and then not accounting for, well, where's Joe? Well, there's smoke-filled condition. I thought he was behind me, blah, 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 blah. And there's lots of chaos. And the stress of the situation is just remarkable. Aaron, you mentioned something about how through training, how do you create a realistic environment for that so that when you are in the midst of that, it's not something that's foreign. It's something that's familiar and you know how to handle it, on that training side of things. So we went ahead and worked with the Kansas City, Missouri Fire Department to come up with a digital way of allowing the accounting for every individual going into event and coming out of event, because in addition to hooking up all the different homes in Kansas City, Google hooked up the majority of the streetlights as Wi-Fi hotspots. This provides a huge opportunity now, because when a 911 call comes in, that particular Wi-Fi hotspot is activated to create what's called a digital fence or a geofence around the property of that particular home that may be on fire. So what we did was we went through a successful 18-month pilot project that allowed us to start creating those geofences, and then allowed the firefighter uniforms to have RFID tags on their name, because RFID can be actually part of ink. And the name tags now that are part of the uniforms are constantly sending off a signal saying, I'm Joe, I'm Joe, I'm Joe. When you go inside of that geofence, it automatically populates a digital version of that incident command sheet. But most importantly, when the firefighters come back out, it automatically populates it and alerts the incident commander that everyone's out safe. So it's a really, really interesting way of taking technology that could be on the outside saying, we can make a lot of money selling Facebook ads and all sorts of crap like that. And we said, no, let's start taking what's been given us, this amazing platform, this huge amount of speeds, not for grandma to put up more videos of whatever on Facebook, but for actually saving lives. So this has really been our takeoff point of seeing what's possible. And the art of the possible is, let's start taking the behaviors out to the non-firefighting community. Let's start looking at self-help. Let's start taking a look at architects and engineers to do the right thing, that when they're submitting their digital versions of the built environment, that I can be assured that I can create an app that inside of the building department, that when they put the right types of information in there, I could take that data and push it back into the firefighter so that they can see, like on an iPhone or an iPad, at least some idea of what they're getting themselves involved with, saving seconds of assessment time. So that's where our passion is, Bobby. We're in this world that says there's lots of great technology, but there's not a lot of people about looking at the practicalities of safety and security first, so that we can put up more videos from grandma on Facebook safely. So yeah, that's a little bit about what we're working on here. And sorry for taking up so much time.
No, and the reason why I wanted to put you and Aaron together is because, in my opinion, and for what that's worth, I'm the only one on the call who gets paid to have an opinion, But in my opinion, uh, I think that you and Aaron need to become closer, because there's no one who understands the reality of the fire ground more, in my opinion, than Aaron Fields today. And not just the reality of the fire ground in terms of fire behavior and that, which is important, but the reality of how the physical human responds to it and how they can maximize their capabilities. And I think to your goal, I think he can also then help you to move towards the community at large and help them to maximize their survivability. Two things before I bring Aaron in to comment about some of what you said and to add to it. Gates has got a project going here in the US and Arizona. I don't know if you're involved in that. I thought it was pretty interesting. I was reading about that the other day. But two of the things you said, and why I think it's really important to put Aaron with you, was Paul Chillers, who I've fallen in love with in recent years, reading and rereading his stuff, once spoke about academia and reality. And he said the problem with academia is they think that academia and the real world are the same thing. In the real world, they're not. And that's why I think you're so valuable to the American Fire Service in particular, to the Fire Service worldwide, is because you understand that. You can do computer modeling, but the computer modeling is based on what was put into that model empirically, right? What it believes for that context is empirically true. That's not the real world. The variables go off the charts, as you know better than anybody, once you hit the real world. And that's why you've got to over-engineer those exits. You've got to over-engineer those sprinkler systems because of I believe, because of those, as Talib would say, those unforeseeable deals. And then the final thought that I stole from Ariel Rubinstein, who said, do your theories and mathematical representations, but don't tell people in the real world how to apply them. Let those with skin in the game select what they need. And I think that's exactly the mantra of DigiCorp and what you're doing with Orby Fire that I really want folks to go and check out. Aaron, let's bring you back in and join the conversation, and let's see where this goes. Did we lose Aaron?
Am I there?
You're here, buddy.
Oh, yeah, I'm there. Sorry. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a fool that doesn't examine the world. A book that was really important to me was a book called Normal Accidents. And
Charles Perrault, 1984.
Yep, and it really talks about the line between the technology that's too much and the technology that's practical, and that as you add more and more levels of complexity, and I think it can be extrapolated into technical component, conceptual, and then technology itself, like the physical, the more difficult that we go with the tactic, and the more difficult the skill that we're performing, and the more complex the equipment, the more risk. There's a turning point when it goes from helping to hurting. And I think that what the key with incorporating new technology, which there's no problem with. How about bunker gear that doesn't give me cancer? Or that we can move and squat down in. And we have to be evaluating it. Yet at the same time, we also have to have the ability to fall back to a grease pencil, because it does work in the snow and the rain. And I mean, the idea that you can track a person, I didn't know anything about this, but off the ink on their name tag, well, that actually, assuming it's going to work everywhere, could really help, because now we've taken out the time of handing off passports and all that. Not to say that you wouldn't have some redundancy that was super low tech, but anything that's going to speed us up to getting our hand lines and our searches done inside the buildings is going to be good. It's when there's 16 buttons to push and 14 levers to pull that it becomes not practical. And the unfortunate thing is our community, you know how it is, Chief. Our community goes, I'm never going to fucking do that. And never even gets turned on. I mean, I got an Ultra Radiac I've got two Ultra Radiacs in my in my rig that we've used like 0 times. We turn them on to check to make sure the batteries are there, and everyone's like, I don't even really remember what it's for, except for a week after the hazmat training. So it's I think with the technology, it's the ability to really focus on where it's a benefit, and not try to wash over the whole industry, but to wash into the areas that, wow, man, this really helps. This really makes it easy, and this is bomb proof. It in the snow, the rain, in an area like my cell phone doesn't get reception in my fire station. I mean, so our radios can't get out of concrete tilt-ups sometimes. So I mean, it's that fine line, and continually evaluating what's coming along and how can it help us, but at the same time not trying to be a tidal wave, trying to pick your position of deployment. So yeah,
that's well said, Aaron. I think that a lot of technologists, which thank God I'm not one, I'm an architect first, so
yeah, right.
It is about its application. One thing I learned in Kansas City was that there was no one silver bullet.
Nope.
We had 4 generations in one house, and they all thought differently, and they all worked differently. And then, like what you mentioned before when you were introducing yourself, about how each person on that truck has a responsibility and a skill set. So there is no one silver bullet. There is no, like you mentioned, like this tsunami saying, hey, this thing's just going to work for everyone and ain't cool. What we learned is that it has to be an ecosystem. And I think that is the threshold that especially the U.S. firefighting community is walking through. Because you do have generations of kids now that are coming up online, getting on the gear in different roles. What I learned at FDIC is, you have from the volunteer level all the way up to the educated professional level with doctorates and everything in between. So you have a huge amount of folks that the primary goal is, number one, keep yourself safe, but number 2, keep yourself safe so that you can save others. And with that as a mission, drilling down into each person's responsibility, and if you can enhance that particular skill set, well, why wouldn't you do that?
Yep.
Right. But it's that formalization process, right? Of saying, this isn't like going out and saying, well, we have a new helmet, or, we have a new, piece of equipment here, and it's going to be standardized. I think that the discovery process, and especially by working through, these types of interactions, I think that the discovery process creates this, firefighting ecosystem that people are going to be able to pick and choose what works for them. Because when, and I'll pick on Kansas City again, where, I was dealing with folks that were, at the height of their careers, in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they don't want to know about this stuff. But they also gave great advice, because, the doe-eyed, early 20s and mid 20s kids were looking at what we were doing. They're going, that's cool. And what I learned was that, the older generation was saying, that's cool, but don't get distracted by it. Don't get so enamored with the data and the analysis that, there's a reality right in front of your face. So you're right. It's this balance of learning of, how much information is too much, when all you're trying to do is help with the assessment process, hopefully saving seconds off of a decision. But nothing replaces experience, right? Or repetition, right, and education and training.
John Bilch, who spent 30 years in the United States Army, and then went on to work at DARPA in the robotics division for another 20 years, I believe, or some mesh of that, closed his talk about robotics by saying, don't fall in love with your robots. Because the synaptic nerves in our brains are so much more highly developed than any AI or AI rather that we could possibly develop, because of the incredible ability for them to regenerate, right? And to Aaron's point about technology creating new pathways to failure, that is really the Apollo 13 example, right? Clear out the computers, here's the moon, here's the earth, bring our boys back type of thing. I think that was highlighted really well. If folks want to look up this one by Dr. David Woods. And one of the things that happened after the first Gulf War and subsequently during our warfighting efforts was a phenomenon that they called predator porn. So in other words, the men and women who were watching the predator footage were able to make decisions based upon all of that input. He replicated that for the fire service by recreating the Buncefield fire, which was a big fire in the UK at an industrial plant. And what Dr. Woods did and his associates was they brought in the new element of drone footage. And they brought in 8 very experienced, very talented incident commanders. 7 of them were unable to be successful because they became obsessed with trying to interpret the footage from the drone prior to making any decision. And they put so much emphasis on the value of that new piece of technology that they ignored the normal everyday inputs that they would have weighted much more heavily, right? Reports from their firefighters in the field, people that were running the plant, things of that nature. So some really interesting stuff when it comes to technology and how it's going to impact the fire service and how we bring it in, which again is why I think that to bring an architect like Paul together with an experienced fireground operator like Aaron and be able to put those incredibly important human skills and knowledge and intuition and dexterity together with someone who's designing cities and environments, built environments where people are going to live and where we are going to respond. And yeah, like Seneca said, our descendants will be amazed by the things that we do not now know. But that notwithstanding, we can fix the holes we know about, right? To go back to Abraham Wald in World War II, we can patch the holes we know about. The unknowns, we can start to try to manage with programs like Aaron's Nozzle Forward by helping the human be able to be more competent and more confident and more effective, and by using Paul's understanding of the technological things that we can start to overlay and utilize. The net idea is so incredible to public safety that the potential of that is phenomenal. There was another topic that I mentioned to Aaron that I wanted Paul you to touch on briefly and kind of explain it to the audience that's going on in terms of energy production. And you were talking to us about the ramp outside of the Kennedy Center and several other facilities and concepts and constructs that are being built today that generate power due to the capture of almost like friction, if you will, the generation of friction and capturing that energy and then transferring that into the grid, which I thought was fascinating. I mentioned that to Aaron, and both of us are completely naive about it, yet it actually exists in some places, which is the other reason why we need architects and developers like yourself to speak to us more so that we understand what's coming and how it can how it can support us better or how we can deal with it in a time of crisis, much like the solar shingles that Tesla is putting out right now. They're not solar panels, they're shingles, they're a whole roof. So, and it's DC current, which we can get in a whole other discussion about that, but it's not gonna, it's not as dangerous as we make it out to be. But anyway, if you would talk a little bit about that, the next wave of, I believe it was fascinating what you said about batteries and Tesla. And if you could just touch on that briefly, I'd love to hear Aaron's input on some of that as well.
Sure, Bobby. So there's been a lot of research done in academia on kinetic energy. And there's 2 primary forms of this energy. One is, like what you mentioned, friction, which is known as triboelectric. That is probably the best known use of that would be the buoys that are offshore that go up and down in the waves to wave energy. It creates a friction between 2 different materials, and you can capture energy from that. The problem with that is getting the energy from offshore to onshore. It's very expensive. But the one that we focused in on was some studies that were originally sponsored by the Department of Defense with Georgia Tech Research Institute in Atlanta. They have an entire group of scientists that are working with the material sciences labs there for compression technology. so that when a weight goes on this material, it excites the molecules and you can harvest that energy. The problem with it has been, again, how do you get it from capturing it, putting it into batteries, and then distributing it? And that was always the big problem. So what's happened over the past 5 years, though, is a rethinking of the materials along with the advancements that have been made due to the F1 race car series. F1 decided just about 6 years ago that they would have a very similar type of event, their Grand Prix, but with electric vehicles. So Qualcomm was in San Diego was experimenting with this idea of wireless charging, very similar to like if you go to Starbucks now and you're waiting for your coffee, they have these little discs. And if you have like an iPhone 10, you can put your phone on it, automatically charges. Very, very similar. But that's static, meaning that you have to be still in order for the electric charge to go through. And the way that the electric charge is wirelessly transferred is very safe. It's at a very low range. It does not cause cancer and all that other stuff, at least from all the studies that have been done. So it's a safe way of transferring power through the air. And what happened just about 18 months ago was the big breakthrough, which is why we're now installed at Atlanta Hartsfield Airport at the security lines for TSA with this energy system called piezoelectric, which is Latin for compression. So if you are walking, jumping up and down, if you're riding a bicycle, driving a car, whatever excites those molecules, again, they start to vibrate. But now with Halo, we can dynamically wireless charge items. Right now, we're at a level that we can charge things like iPhones and mobile phones and tablets and things like that. We are going through our first iterations of equipment, things like hot dog warmers and popcorn machines and that type of thing at the new Atlanta Mercedes-Benz Arena. But where we're going with this is now into appliances, equipment, and things like lighting that will be wirelessly charged based upon people's movement. So that's where we have our first outdoor installation, largest one of its kind, at NASA at the Kennedy Space Center. So if you're at the visitor center, please go. The entire outdoor plaza is piezoelectric enabled, and we are showcasing behavior change. That we tell stories by people being able to look at the ground, and if they move, things light up. In the case of Atlanta Hartsfield Airport, if you move, there's a station right in front of you that has a camera, and if you move fast enough, you can see the energy that's built up, and it'll take a selfie of you that you can put up to your Instagram or Facebook account. We have over 500,000 people now that have done it. But the real big one is we're petitioning the NFL that the actual playing surface of the Mercedes-Benz Arena, that the home games of the Atlanta Falcons, as the players are playing, they're keeping the lights on. So this stuff is real. It's growing in its ability to be commercialized, because like any new academic research, you must put it into a productization. Otherwise, it's a really cool thing that you've done one-offs, but you're not going to be able to pick it up at Lowe's or Home Depot anytime soon. But we use a very similar type of what's called technology readiness level measure. It was originally created by the Department of Defense. It goes from 0 to 9 because they have to assess all sorts of technologies for defense and that type of thing. So 0, it's a PowerPoint. It's a really cool idea that you hear on FA. But there's the other side that says when you're up to like an 8 or 9, you're ready to have it in Home Depot or Lowe's. Right now, the piezoelectric that we're working with the materials that we're using, are at an 8. So what we're doing here in China and in the Middle East is now going into the productization that right now per kilowatt hour, the cost of installing this is about the same as putting in a solar energy system. So we're competing. Within 36 months, the price will be cheaper than coal. So we're making this something that can be deployed quickly. Usually there's a surface material that sits on top of it, but that is not exactly how it has to work. We're doing it for aesthetic purposes, like underneath carpet, underneath ceramic tile, underneath wood flooring, outside underneath asphalt, underneath concrete, underneath rubber. But where we're looking to go, and this is the big breakthrough, Bobby, is putting it into autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, no more charging stations. Charging stations are so 2017, right? So, sorry for the state of California that just spent billions of dollars putting in charging stations. Maybe you can convert them into something else, because you're not going to need it. Working with Michelin tires right now, that the compression material can put on the inside treads of tires that create enough energy for a public bus to do its rounds. Imagine that. So now what's happens is when you have things like public transportation that is now off the grid, it can also be something that enables things, such as every scheduled stop, there's a certain amount of feet that you go, and we know how much energy is used. We're creating more energy than the individual bus needs right now, which means that we can offload wirelessly to a bus stop and have that bus stop become a transformer to AC current to actually put it back up into the grid for a profit. This all sounds like science fiction, except that on May 9th of this year, the citizens of Nashville, Tennessee had a referendum, $9 billion tax increase that they had a vote on, that they were going to go to a light rail system with a tunnel to actually take all the traffic that goes right downtown, the through traffic, and put it on either side of the downtown area. $9 billion. Well, we went ahead about 2 weeks before the vote and showed them a fully functioning autonomous public transportation system based upon this technology that would cost 1.6, and we would not touch, and we're not asking for a dime from the taxpayers. It would be through a PPP program from the White House called the infrastructure program that everyone's talking about. We're doing it. And the existing referendum was voted down. So we're working right now with the city officials, councilmen and mayor, to look at what the citizens want, which is this program, which will show piezoelectric off like we've never seen before. The ramifications that we can think of is, imagine as we start to move forward over the next 5 to 10 years, and this becomes just more and more and more prevalent, is the ability to create power in remote areas. Everything from, potential or not potential, but events like, the terrible wildfires that happen in places like California, where it's very difficult to bring the resources out to areas when you don't know where the next event's going to hit, right? So I think that, as this technology matures, we should take a peek and see what is its implications, for safety and security first, because, we're figuring out how to do it on the fun stuff. But, to have meaning and to actually be part of the fabric of how we, live, work, play, it's going to have to come down to, the first responders on how they use this, and potentially, what are the dangers involved there.
Right. That's why I thought that there was no, Aaron, that's why I thought of you the minute I heard this talk. I said, okay, where's Fields when I need him?
Well, half of that I was unable to follow just because of the jargon. But what I got from it is that my 10-year-old and my 13-year-old, I can get a 10 by 10 pad of this stuff, and I can produce and sell off the energy just by having them doing their normal day.
Correct.
I just have those. I'm going to put those. They're going to unionize. I'm going to put those kids to work. They're just going to be, because my boys wake up running and they run until they stop running and then they go to bed. So that's great, and also that'll allow me to move further away from into my fortress of solitude.
Well, you know what? It actually takes the man cave to another level. Instead of being a couch potato, in order to watch ESPN, you're going to have to move. So we're all going to be in shape.
Yeah.
Imagine what we could harness off of, say, a fitness center where you have people on ellipticals and treadmills. I mean, theoretically, those people could be generating enough power to power their homes.
Yep.
Correct.
I mean, the application is amazing. It goes back to Tesla's, old theories about wireless power transmissions, right? I mean, this is the reality of Tesla's dream. Nikolai, not
right.
Elon Musk. I mean, Nikolai over 80, 90 years ago. So, just imagine, what he would have done with Niagara Falls had he had, where we're at today with the generation of energy from someplace like Niagara Falls, for gosh sakes. You talk about compression, right? And there are, it's just an amazing concept to me. But I think that what's important and why I wanted to bring Paul into it is that every day in every city there are technologies, there are things being built, whether it's Nashville, it doesn't matter where you are. You could be anywhere in America today. If you're not connected in with the people who are developing your community and developing your community's resources, you're so far behind the curve, it's unbelievable. At some point in time, we're going to be developing roads for autonomous vehicles, and they may not be compatible with our, standard combustion engine stuff, which I always love and will always adore. I'm an old car guy, and we're going to all want to have those things to be able to live together, but they may need to be on separate routes, right? And how is that going to work? And can we, if we get in early enough with men like Paul that are developing cities and men like Mr. Gates, who's building a city in Arizona, perhaps we can make these dedicated pathways accessible to our fire apparatus so that when necessary, in a life-saving emergency, whether it's medical or fire, that pathway can be, utilized exclusively by that vehicle and reducing response times dramatically without increasing risk to the responders or the general public by driving at excessive speeds on, shared roadways. So the limits are just endless about what's going on, and how fast it's moving is really important, which is why, we desperately need to hear Paul and Paul's message about architecture and academics versus reality and technology on the main program at FDIC, so that 7,000, 8,000 men and women go out with a greater understanding of not just the hazards of the future, but the incredible potential of the future. The people who are fear mongering. I went through Y2K, I went through Kahoot Tech, and boy, they really knocked us out. No, they did nothing. People will always want to look, because it's human nature to catastrophize, right? What's the worst possible outcome of everything? And more often than not, because of creative people like Paul and Aaron, that never happens. And we have an opportunity to maximize the incredible potential here by listening to these two men, whether it's Aaron and his incredible understanding of physics and how it relates to not only posture, but position and closeness to the ground, and using gravity in ways that we may not, to counter forces, from our hand lines and all the stuff that he teaches, and with his numerics and nozzle forward, which is amazing stuff. And then if you haven't had it, please contact him and get it. And then Paul with building the future, building the communities of the future, and then retrofitting the existing communities with technology that's going to be safer, more efficient, more environmentally friendly, and ultimately a higher quality of life. I mean, I'm always amazed by the arrogance of people who think that the great story of, I think it was 1946 or 47, when the man who was the head of the patent office said, we need to close the patent office because everything that's ever been invented has been invented. Not so much, Sparky. So, these are people who are truly developing the future, who are truly, changing the way we look at the world. And that's why I wanted to have, and Paul Combs also. Paul is an incredibly brilliant man. And I want to bring the three of you together because I'm excited about it. I can't imagine what this nation is going to look like in just 10 years with you guys.
I think that one of the big things, right, is that no matter what it is, whether it's a hand line or a compression energy generating road, we as a public and we as a community need to hold ourselves to what it is we want to be, not what we are. And I think that fear, you mentioned, Chief, is fear comes from the unknown. Human beings are naturally afraid of what they don't know or don't understand. And then the other thing that comes from that, right, is ego. And ego will be the city manager that goes, I don't like the compression road because I didn't think of it. And we're going to go a different way. Yeah. And I really think that the crux of the matter, no matter what it is Thoreau walking to the river from the cabin. And every day he walked a different path because he wanted to learn the woods, and then he could actually choose the best path. If all you know is the one way, that's not a choice. That's a habit. And what do we lose from comparing and contrasting new things or old things that are in my case, I'm not doing anything new. I'm simply reformulating and twisting and tweaking. But what do we learn from, what do we lose from comparing something to what it is we do? We either gain a greater understanding of what we do, adjust what we are doing to be better, or discard what we're doing and go, yeah, with what I had at the time, this was the best choice. What I have now allows me to make a different choice. And I think that the other thing that we have to realize is efficient and effective are two completely different things. And Andy Fredericks said that with regards to the use of water, but that's true with everything. If I have never had an efficient meal, and that's why my kids are able to discuss deep concepts. Like, people that have taken my class have heard me quote my old kid, and he says, as a 12-year-old, you don't have to worry, Dad. I'm never going to be someone that wallows in my own self-conscience. And when asked when he chose that verbiage, his answer was, well, if you take a bath or you shower, you get clean. But if all you ever think about is yourself, you'll never be clean, like a pig wallowing in mud. Or my young guy, same thing. He comes up with stuff all the time where they're really having these ideas that show rigorous thought. And efficient and effective aren't the same thing. There is, as a builder, I'm sure you get it. Like, there's power in spinning a socket. And that doesn't mean you can't use a power tool to do it later, but there's value in learning how to spin a socket. And with regards to technology, I always hear, and everything, not just technology, reformulation of systems. It's this concept of, well, if it's not how I did it, I'm scared of it. That's why I don't like it. And that's ego and fear, which you can't manage anything from. And then the other component is, well, we can be more efficient. But efficient and effective are two different things. And we need to always be evaluating, does increased speed lead to more effective application? And it is not always the case. So, and however we dovetail all this stuff in the future, it just has to be, we as a community and a public have to be holding our people making these decisions to a standard. Like, I'm sorry your ego's hurt. I don't care. Like, make the adjustment or stay the course, whichever makes the sense. So anyway.
McChrystal pointed out a very similar point in his Team of Teams book, where he talked about how doctrine, military doctrine specifically, can become so limiting, right? Because it creates a construct that the people who live in it too long can't think out of, right? So it could be effective, but it's also limiting, which is problematic. So, Paul, any closing thoughts, and what are you working on right now? What's your current project? And we'll start to wrap up.
Current project. Well, I've entered the automotive industry based upon some of the wonderful insights I just heard from Aaron. He described, efficiency and effectiveness. I'd also throw productivity in there as well, where when you're talking about the digital world, people are constantly going back to the physical manufacturing measure of productivity, and it's wrong. I can be very productive by taking a wrong answer in Microsoft Word and saying save as 1,000 times. I've now been very productive, right? But the efficiency and effectiveness piece has actually led us to tackling a big issue, and that is that the entire world that I've seen, from both the driverless communities that are creating these driverless cars, which are ridiculous, and this entire world of guidance systems that are killing people, like in Tempe, Arizona. And people are going, well, it's this guy's fault or it's that's fault. But instead of getting down to the crux of it, maybe you're using the wrong technology. Because we built the built environment, we create a digital twin of what's in reality every day. Every time I hit an enter key, I'm creating the digital twin, which means that we have an opportunity then to use technology to create things like digital corridors that autonomous vehicles can run through, that are so accurate that it replicates what you do every day walking outside of your home. you don't pay attention to what's in front of you, which is all the buildings. You just know that you don't drive your car through that wall. I mean, it's like that, right? Well, we're just digitizing that and saying, well, that's the way the world's going to operate, and we're blowing people out of the water. So, yeah, the reason I'm in China is I'll be speaking with the U.S. Consul General here in Hong Kong, Chamber of Commerce, to introduce a autonomous electric vehicle system for free here in Hong Kong, and we're going to be test bedding it in a $10 billion development just about a half hour north of Hong Kong in China, that will start to take into account that there will be no motorized vehicles except for emergency vehicles. Because hybrids don't work. We're firm believers in that. I will never design a city or a system that has both people and autonomous things working together, because the only thing you can count on with human beings is their irrationality. That doesn't work in a rational place called technology, so you can't mix the two. It's also the world's first DC-powered only city. There will be no AC power because there's no need to transform it to send it somewhere, because all the power is being generated where you are. So the entire city is a power plant. And Aaron, you raised something pretty interesting before you said
Edison is spinning in his grave right now.
yeah, exactly right. He finally won.
Yeah, he finally won. That poor elephant. He killed Bambi the elephant for no good reason. He just had to wait.
Yeah, 100 or so years we proved him right. But what was raised up before was this new way of working. Bobby, you mentioned about how do you take these newer ways of working and living and whatnot, and not cause almost like a future shock, right? Where people are so like wow that they don't realize that they also have to get to work, or they have to take care of their kids or do whatever. We can't drop ship something like Dubai all over the world. Dubai is wonderful to look at, but I never lived there. It's a soulless, cold place. There's no contextualization to its history or anything. But at the end of the day, here's my big problem. As we're introducing a lot of these technologies as an ecosystem, because it's not about just the autonomous vehicle, it's about the energy system, it's about the lighting system we use, which is LED streetlights that can carry a 10G Wi-Fi signal for first responders only. That's the way that we're using it first, right? So, very, very cool things, but who's responsible in governance? That roadway is a power plant. Is it the Department of Transportation, or is it the power company? So we're creating a lot of issues that I think are going to hit the majority of first responders, both police, firefighting, that we haven't even thought of yet, because of the ramifications. Because as we're moving forward, it's a never-ending jigsaw puzzle. And I think that, again, programs like this, on FE, FDIC for learning, getting the community to talk, not just amongst ourselves, but also to reaching out to people that we should be having conversations with. In my case, I had to talk with General Motors. I had to talk with Elon over at Tesla, because I had to learn where they were going. And then you can make your adjustments. And I think that, that's a challenge that for the next generation of firefighters, I think that's going to be the way of the future. It's constant change, but with a foundation like what Aaron brings of, this is how work gets done. So thank you for putting this together. And Aaron, I look forward to talking further with you in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I'll tell you, when you see Elon, Paul, just tell him that Aaron and Bobby said hi.
No worries.
Well, Aaron, any closing thoughts, and we'll say goodbye to the crowd?
No, I mean, I just do what you're supposed to do. Meet the obligation.
There you go. Our sacred obligations and our social contract obligations. Hey, it was wonderful visiting with you two guys. I want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Hey, folks, if you were listening, check out Nozzle Forward. If you Google it, they've got a great webpage. And also look up Orbi, ORBIFIRE, Orbi Fire Digit Group, DIGIT, Digit Group. You'll be amazed at what's on there for you to look at and learn about and become part of. Only a fool allows life to happen to him. You've got to participate, and that's why I thought that these three gentlemen. Unfortunately, Paul couldn't join us, but these two gentlemen that we had today are helping to move the world in a better direction, and they're looking for you to help them and participate. So, if you're serious about what you're doing in your community, reach out to Paul and his corporation. See what they might be doing near your community, if your community's got an infrastructure project going on. And as always, I'll just remind you that FDIC is going to happen soon. The call for presentation ends at the end of June 25th. And if you're going to be attending, please register early. The hotel spaces will sell out, and I can't help you if you contact me in April looking for a room, or even if you contact me in December. They're going to sell out quickly, as they always do, because people like Aaron Fields and Paul Doherty and Paul Combs are willing to come and share their time and talent and expertise and wisdom and insight, and truly share it. And just thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you all for joining with us today, and we'll see you next week on another Hump Day Hangout.